thrilled to be here in Troy. It's our first time here, and what an incredible space to be invited into. It's incredibly beautiful and inspiring here in the sanctuary. We are the Aizuri String Quartet. We're based in New York City, and I'm going to introduce my friends. This is Miho Saegusa on violin. Emma Frucht, also on violin. Ayane Kozasa on viola. And I'm Ouzounian on the cello. So our quartet has been together for about 7 years. And you know, the quartet tradition really started to come of age about a couple hundred years ago with Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven. And we love playing that repertoire as though it were written just yesterday and really kind of looking at things in a new, fresh way and discovering them. At the same time, we love to discover young, living American composers, not just American composers, but really all types of composers, and to really get into their voices and discover their music. Everyone's writing such unique and unusual stuff right now, so that's a really big passion of our groups. So tonight we wanted to actually dive into some of the music that was written for us by two young composers named Gabriella Smith and Paul Wianco. Gabriella Smith wrote a fantastic piece for us called Carrot Revolution. This was a piece that she wrote in 2015. She was a student at the Curtis Institute of Music, where we also studied as an ensemble. And she received a commission from an art gallery in Philadelphia, the Barnes Foundation, which is a really spectacular collection of postmodern and impressionist and post-impressionist artwork. And she walked around the galleries and discovered the very unusual way in which artwork was displayed there. The collector of this collection, Albert C. Barnes, he chose ways of combining paintings and metalwork and furniture that he'd been collecting in really special ways. He'd find that a chair and a painting really resonated with one another, and he called these ensembles. So Gabriella thought of this idea, and she thought she would bring together all of her passions, a lot of different styles, eclectic, different musical languages into this one piece called Carrot Revolution. And I'm actually going to now pass it on to Emma, who's going to kind of get more into the details of this piece.
So this piece is so much fun for us to perform, partially because we get to make a lot of sounds with our instruments that maybe our teachers when we were growing up said we could never make. So kind of scratching and sliding tones. And Gabriella combines them to create this really incredible percussive texture. So we're just going to walk you through all of the different things that the four of us do together. So I'll start with myself. I get to do a technique that's called chopping, which finds its origins in fiddle music. So this was completely new to me, so I actually had to call a friend who knows how to fiddle, and I was like, okay, I have to chop. How do I chop? So you kind of want to make like a popping sound with your scratching, and you'll see Ayane is doing a completely different scratching sound at the same time. So it sounds a little bit like, and she uses it to create a rhythm, and that goes on for a big span of the piece. So Ayane's scratching sound is called a scratch tone.
Sometimes I personally feel like it sounds like a frog croaking. When we've taken it to other schools, there was an elementary school kid who said it sounded like a DJ scratching, and then I felt really cool about it, so I'm just going to say I'm a DJ scratcher. But it sounds like this.
And then Miho gets to be the one who slides around her fingerboard.
Mm-hmm.
And then Karen is our drum set. So we're going to play just a little section from the beginning of this piece so you see how all of the sounds are layered on top of each other. So Gabriella also takes a lot of influence from other styles of fiddling playing, not just kind of American fiddling school, Celtic fiddling. So we're gonna play a short section from in the middle of the piece where it's kind of a bunch of Celtic fiddlers playing together. And then later on, that transforms even further. She quotes The Who's Baba O'Reilly and combines it with this fiddling.
It's crazy.
So we're going to finish this off by playing like a sneak preview of this piece because it's going to be on our concert tomorrow night along with a lot of other really fantastic pieces. So here is your sneak peek at Gabriella Smith's Carrot Revolution. One moment.
Thanks so much. So, if you can believe it, the piece gets even crazier than that. So that's just like a third of the piece. So if you can make it out tomorrow night, we'd love to see you there to listen to the whole entire Carrot Revolution. It's also the first piece on our debut album as well, so you can listen to it that way. And we're gonna switch gears to another piece on our album. It's the last piece on the record. It's a piece called Lift by Brooklyn-based composer Paul Wianco. And when we approached Paul to write a piece for us, a lot of the times contemporary works can be about 8 to 10 minutes. That's pretty standard. And we decided that we really wanted to bring a piece to life that was more of a complete work, a work that could stand on its own on one half of a concert. So a 30-minute contemporary work. And we knew we were taking a risk with that idea because it would be a piece that nobody's ever heard of. But Paul is not only an amazing composer, but he's also a fantastic cellist. And so writing for the string quartet was kind of second nature to him. And as a cellist, I think the biggest passion for him is to play in a string quartet. And actually right now, he's touring with the Kronos Quartet. He's subbing as the cellist there because the original cellist is on maternity leave. So that's kind of his dream come true. But Paul, with this piece, Lift, he has a very unique way of composing. Because he is a performer, he tends to record all the parts first. So he'll record lots of fragmented ideas in his recording booth, and at the end he will piece them all together. And so the recording of the music comes first rather than the sheet music. And this means that not obviously, because he can play the cello, he will play all the cello lines. But not only that, he can play violin and viola. And the way he plays those lines is he puts it on his lap and plays it like a mini cello. And oddly enough, it sounds very, very good. But one of the really funny things and the interesting things about learning this piece was that a lot of the physics of some of the stuff that he wrote for the upper 3 strings was definitely kind of cello moves. And so, for example, at the beginning of the piece, I have a bunch of slides that go up and down in a very high register. So if I were to play it on my viola, it would sound like... It's quite easy this way, just going up and down this way. However, when I put the viola up, I've had trouble with this where when I put too much excitement into it, I can kind of hit my face. There have been times where I have done this, and my whole bow hits my face. So the physics of that was kind of interesting for him to realize, oh, it's not as easy as playing it cello style. And another part was in Miho's part, there's a part that's called Surprise Attack. And she has to do a bunch of very fast pitches, which on cello is actually quite easy. So maybe Miho can demo.
If, I'm thinking like maybe, he wasn't using his bow when he was composing this part. So if you weren't using your bow,
it's very easy to just go back and forth, and the gravity of pulling the string this way is actually quite natural.
And you get a lot of volume that way. And then so it was really tricky for me to up here and holding my bow at the same time because this is extra weight that I have to carry. It's just more physical exertion. Like I think I, worked it so it sounds.
At this point, she sounds pretty darn good. But when she first started, the physics of pulling up, because she has to pull the string up this way rather than down, was a totally different concept from when he was composing it. But with all of that said, it's an amazing piece, and we're going to play the first and second movements for you. You can kind of hear through this first movement. We'll play the first movement first. Throughout this whole first movement, you can hear the buildup of energy, and some of the words that he uses at the end of the movement are unrelenting, colossal, and you can hear us just getting more and more intense in that way. So this is Lift by Paul Lianco, the first movement.
things about playing a piece by a composer living now, a lot of them have gotten to use really descriptive words to describe, exactly the kind of gesture they want, or the character they want, or the mood that they want. So like you heard at the end of this movement, the colossal and the gigantic. And so in the next movement, in the second movement that we're gonna play, it starts out very differently. And we thought it was really interesting to kind of juxtapose the beginning of this one with the beginning of the Carrot Revolution that you heard earlier, because Paul also kind of plays with 4 different textures. In Gabriella's piece, we were all kind of doing our own, we were in our own kind of sound and textural world, and she played it with it that way. And then so Paul does that, but then also on top of it, we're each in our own kind of temporal world, so we're not really in the same tempo. And so he kind of plays with the timelessness that you might feel as an effect. And so in the opening, Emma is kind of our pillars, our clock. And so her part, Yeah, so that's kind of our foundation that goes through this whole section. And then on top of that, he has some really beautiful and sometimes quirky ways to describe what he wants the rest of us to play. So Karen has these pizzicato lines. He says it's like raindrops, the first raindrops before a downpour. And then Ayane's is different. Hers is like an electronic glitch. And then mine, he says like a rusted swing set. So he kind of layers that in different ways to create a completely different opening to the second movement than you heard in the first movement. And then the other really interesting thing that Paul does near the end of this movement, a lot of times a composer might take one melody or a phrase and give it to one instrument and they play it all the way through, and then the other three have a different texture underneath. But in this one, Paul kind of almost has this is like true test of quartet playing, like how well do you know your quartet mates? But he has us kind of finishing each other's sentences. So he keeps passing and tossing. It's like a big game of give and take. And so we're going to play this section a little bit slower for right now so you can hear all of the passing that we do.
It feels like you're like tossing a ball to each other.
So this is the second movement. Yeah.
It's actually quite tricky.
So this is the second movement of Lift. little bit more into these two works from our album. So we wanted to leave you as a final thing, the last part of the last movement of Lift. And Paul kind of thought of this whole piece as his ode to joy. And the last movement kind of comes in 3 different sketches, and each one kind of is a representation for him of a kind of uplifted feeling. So the first 2 that we won't play tonight, it's called Glacial and Maniacal. That one's especially fun to play. But the last one is called Lift, and it's really kind of an explosion of colors and groove, and it's really fun to play. But thank you again, and hopefully we'll be able to talk afterwards and see you tomorrow at Anna Willard.
Shall we do a Q&A afterwards?
Oh yeah! Do we have time for that, Jennifer?
I think you have time for a Q&A.
Let's do it. All right. After we play this last movement, we'd love
Have your questions
Yes,
ready.
chat. Yes.
So there's a lot of bright and hardworking composers out there. They're clever and they can write amazing. They've been trained really well to write amazingly for their instruments. How did you guys call dibs on the ones who can put together things in like the most engaging way?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for our particular album with the 5 composers that are on there, we got very lucky because a few of them were students. One of them was Gabriella was a student at school when we were there, when we were in the same school together, and just so happened that her assignment was to write for us, and it was like a really great piece.
We just kind of ended up we noticed that when we had these commissioning opportunities or pieces that were just written for us, they happened to be really great pieces. And that's kind of unusual, but each one of them was so great. So we thought, well, we've spent a lot of time, in contact with these composers, workshopping the pieces, kind of developing them and really internalizing them and seeing them grow and making them a part of our repertoire and our identity as a group. So that's how we wanted to kind of curate this album.
Yeah, and I think a part of it also is that the the instrumentalist has to love the piece as well and really bring it to life. That's like a big part of it. And so I think putting in that time into any piece for us really means a lot to make it something that is convincing on stage.
And then we have a lot of different projects, and we really try to think about what composer kind of would be a great fit, because there are so many composers that we would love to work with, and so we really try to find the right kind of opportunity maybe that's inspiring for them and that would create something special. Yeah.
And I think in doing this, especially the album, the project where we were working really closely with these composers, that kind of made us realize like that's something we really love doing. And so whenever we go on the road now, like even this week, we were at Williams College right before we came here, and we got a chance to meet some of the composition students there and to kind of play through their pieces and workshop them. And so that's something that like we try to do if there's a chance, because then we get to hear, who's out there now, who's kind of developing a really interesting voice. And
Yes.
I have a question on annotation.
Yes.
For contemporary string quartets, are there now standard ways to annotate some of the unusual ways to use your instruments?
Some of that evolved over time. So, when we see, sometimes, for example, there are pitches between the standard pitches that you would play on a keyboard. So microtonal music, that's, we're dividing, say, a whole step in smaller increments or a half step in even smaller increments. There's sort of a standard notation to indicate that. That's one example of how notation has evolved and become standard.
A lot of the time, composers will include kind of a key at the beginning of a piece for any markings that they may have in their music that aren't completely recognizable from our kind of classical education, or like classical canon education, I should say. There are many that are becoming kind of more widely known and widely taught, but it's always helpful when we have a key and kind of explanations for what kind of sound a composer is going for.
So when, for example, you hit the cello in different places, different places, and it's like a picture cello and say hit it here.
That's interesting. I mean, that could have been one method, and that's the really awesome thing about all of this, is that it's being created and everything is happening now. But Gabriella, she actually, the way a music staff has 5 lines, she created her own staff with just a few lines, and each place on that staff indicates a different part of the cello. So she wrote out the rhythms and onto a staff, and I had to kind of learn that, if this note is on this part of her staff, it means top left of the cello. If it's written here, it's the front of the cello on the bottom of the instrument, and just kind of practicing that, her new notation.
It reminds me
Yeah.
of Bop It or Twister.
Yeah. Yeah, initially it was pretty awkward, and then it just took a little doing, yeah.
Yeah, as a follow-up to that, if you were a string quartet playing in the 1780s, most of the pieces you were playing, people think were new, kind of used the same ensemble of techniques. If you were playing a string quartet in the 1820s or the 1870s, or maybe even going into like the 1900s, kind of all the new pieces you would be getting kind of use the same techniques which you would transfer from one to the other. But it seems like in contemporary music, each piece that you come across has got its own entire constellation of sounds that it uses. What does that mean for a quartet in terms of your learning time, prep time, psychology?
Well, we're crazy, so we're like totally nuts.
I think we have to approach everything with a really open mind, and like you said, we kind of we know the history behind this, and even in kind of quartets in like the early 1900s, late 1800s, they're starting to kind of make ponticello sound, which is like by the bridge sound, and tosto sound, which is on the fingerboard, and Bartok pizzes, which would be in like kind of the mid 19th century, the snap pizzes, that enters the string quartet writing. And so if we just kind of keep that in mind, it's that the techniques are always going to progress to new sounds. I mean, you asked how much time it takes. There's a lot of score studying involved, and a lot of kind of just time with your instrument figuring out physicality of everything.
Yeah.
So it's not just your standard, like, I need to learn the notes and practice with the metronome. There's a lot of thought behind it.
And
You've learned a couple of Highland quartets. You can kind of sight read the next one you come to and do a tolerable job of it. You can't do that with the stuff you're playing now.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I also feel like, but as you get to know one composer, like, have we played any like multiple pieces from a contemporary composer? Maybe not.
Not yet.
But if we get to play like one of Paul's pieces, a different piece, I think now we can kind of understand the sound world that he's going for. And I think more than anything these days, the first recording of that piece is very crucial. So the pieces that we recorded on our album, we worked with the composers a lot. Even if we worked with them during the kind of world premiere, for the recording, we kind of had them involved a lot in the process to make sure that this first recording of their piece was the thing that they wanted for posterity, and that all the future students and musicians would listen to this and say, oh, this is how they make that sound. And so making that first recording as accurately as possible for that composer, I think, is very important.
Green jack. Wait.
On the recording question, I'm curious about how you do that. I'm assuming you record live, but how do you mic your instruments, and do you do overdubs what's that process like for a string quartet?
We decided to record in a studio because we wanted a super controlled environment for these pieces that we were recording that were super complicated. Like some pieces actually had, like one piece has a bunch of sound sculptures in it that we moved into the studio, and that was a very complicated element. Another piece involves Ayane playing a wind melodica in addition to the viola. So we didn't really want to be in a concert hall. We wanted something really controlled. And then we just worked with a really great engineer who did everything.
But,
yeah.
but we didn't have DPAs
Right.
or anything. Like everything was overhead mics and room mics for that.
Yeah.
And we had a couple, just stand mics, yeah.
That same piece where Ayane was playing the melodica was interesting because one movement, the violins are playing normally, but then in the next movement he does ask us to play or like, you know, here. So like the mic placement would have been really difficult to do as a live recording, but because we were in the studio, we were able to, really like figure it out, take the time to figure it out.
We did play one piece where we did put DPAs on, and we had to use a Super Ball mallet. And because the mallet is so soft, it was necessary to have a really close mic. So there are times that we do use like really like DPAs and stuff. It just depends on the piece.
When you're
Sure.
when you're workshopping with the composers, how often they have a conception of a sound that they want? How often do they turn out to be right? And how often do you, in the workshop process, possibly change or make more realistic what they're hoping to achieve?
I think whatever if they write, you know, a word, something descriptive, like what they were after, then that gives, like, I think that gives us so much information, like just interpreting the notes. And so sometimes if we don't get that, like this is the flip side, like if we see a passage and we're thinking like there are like maybe, you know, 3-4 ways we could play this, but we don't know which way to go, then we have to ask them, you need to be more specific and like what are you after, because otherwise it can sound like this or it can sound like this. And so I think that's interesting for them that there are so many like other ways that what they wrote could be played.
I think sometimes it also depends on the composer, but I find that usually they're really like happy to hear something, maybe not quite exactly the way they imagined it in their ear, but if it's done in a convincing way and it really like those performers are, you know, doing something that's very powerful and personal, I think they tend to get really excited by that too, and are often really open to that also. Yeah.
But you would feel that it's to some extent it's a collaborative process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
I kind of have a hyper-specific question. In the beginning of the second movement, there was like this dun, 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 this like triplet thing that kind of seemed to like overlap like upon itself, and I think you were doing like it was like in 3, or like how was that notated? Were you the people who were doing the triplet thing, or was that in a different time signature? Or were you guys just overlapping?
Is it that part?
Yeah. Yeah.
That was beautiful. I was just wondering.
Yeah, and then
I forget
it's
what.
in
Yeah, I got it. So it's kind of a composite measure of 4/8, 3/8, 4/8, and in the 3/8, it's 5 against the 3.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It just kind
And
of
then-
kept like overlapping.
Yeah.
so we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. And in that 1, 2, 3, there are 5 notes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'm just playing steady eighth notes. Then
So it sounds like it gets off every other bar.
And then it gets back gone.
I'm
Yeah.
playing
Yeah.
11 of those.
My
Two.
favorite
Makes sense,
groups
yeah.
of 3, and then the triplet would kind of just like excite
Yeah.
my ear every time. It was really nice.
Math is fun. Math and music. Yes.
So, I had a question kind of from another planet, which is, when you were showing us the DJ move at the beginning,
Oh, yeah.
right, which was turned out beautiful. I wonder if you heard Tom Morello use that. You know Tom Morello, the rock,
Yes.
heavy rock metal.
Yeah.
And so there's a song, for example, in the Ballad of Tom Joad that he does with Bruce Springsteen.
Mhm.
And then he has a console at the end, and it's all using the DJ.
Oh, cool.
Strings.
Mhm.
That's an incredibly powerful DJ sound, and you might
Mhm.
find it interesting for people.
Yeah. Somehow these techniques kind of resonate through the ages, but in different. It's interesting that they're all like different instruments too, but somehow they're making all the same sounds. Like if you didn't see the instrument itself, they all sound very similar. Yeah, that's really neat.
Yes.
You were mentioning at the beginning, like you brought up playing the classics like Haydn and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you guys ever feel limited in the kind of like spaces that you can perform contemporary music, or like if it's different in any way, or you get like a different vibe from audiences rather than playing like classics and stuff.
What was, if we feel what? Sorry.
Sorry. Like if you feel like limited at all in the kinds of spaces that will like have contemporary music versus like people looking for string quartets that will play, classics.
I don't think we felt limited so far. We played, Carrot Revolution from anywhere, from like a standard concert hall to somewhere like here, to like some schools in Chile or some, yeah, right? Yeah. I don't know, and like every single reaction, and I think like the beauty of it is somehow that piece resonates with everyone in maybe slightly different ways, but everybody always says that piece really hit me hard. And that's like kind of the beauty of these pieces too. Yeah. What we try to do is to try and program in a way where these pieces really are highlighted within a program. And so sometimes, like we talked about Lift, sometimes Lift ends a whole program. And usually, maybe a more romantic style work might end a program, like Schubert or a big Beethoven or something. But I think it's really compelling to have a contemporary work kind of be the last thing that people hear as well.
And I think we also try to kind of, when we make a program, that like we have a story that kind of threads all of the pieces through it, so that the newer work isn't just like a newer work for the sake of having that on a program. And so for tomorrow's program, the theme is locally sourced. So like the composers are kind of drawing from things that inspire them, that from their life or from their time or from the area that they're living in, or like all sorts of kind of looking at that in various ways. And so I think that's how we were able to kind of go from Carrot Revolution, where Gabriella takes the music that inspires her kind of into this one piece, and then directly from that to a Haydn, where he kind of was always fond of using folk music, and especially kind of that gypsy style. And so he, like, the quartet where we happen to be playing has that in some of the movements, and then on to the next piece. So we try to create the program kind of as a whole, yeah. So then it doesn't feel at all limiting.
Yes.
Do you have any merch with you?
Merch! We do. We have our CD that includes Carrot Revolution and Lift.
You can hear Ayane playing the melodica.
And many other really great pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, come to us if you would like a copy.
Did you learn melodica just for that piece?
Yes. Actually, I didn't know I was going to play melodica until I received the score. And he's like, I hope you like playing melodica. And I was like, what? But it was actually an instrument that is very dear to that composer. It has a very personal connection to him. So yeah, it was like really exciting to see him so excited about it. So, yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Wow.